Hi, 5th through 8th grade. Um, Today we are going to have a short video, and it's going to talk about just some finishing touches or final things about this project that we have been working on for several weeks. So, first, let me just point out a few things. As far as in Google Classroom, we have all of the resources and everything that I've posted for you to be able to do this project, which will include a posting for today. That's November the 25th. But you sometimes do need to go back to them. So I'm going to go back for a second to the first one on November 4th, and I'm going to go to this research overview to think about what we should have done and where we should be right now. First, we have these topics for each grade level. And if we go back to the beginning, you should have picked, excuse me, back to the beginning, you should have picked your topic. Let me know. I put it in that topic document, and you should be able to look by your name and see it there. There are some people who have not done that first step, and now I've said it from week to week for the past 4 weeks now. If you are one of those people and you happen to be watching this video, you need to catch up, and it's not impossible. But that would be the first step. You need to go back and look through the things and communicate. Second, we have from November 11th, you should have done research and filled out that research form. That is like a notes taking sheet for your research for your topic. From last week, November 18th, you should have watched the video on the basics of Google Slides, which I know a lot of people are familiar with, finished your research. And even if you only did that, if you got all your research done last week, that would be fine, and you would have no problem catching up, finishing everything you needed to. And then, if you did have time, what the video talked about was starting your Google slideshow. I also gave you a document that shows for each grade, if you had a question like how many slides does it need to be, what should go on each slide, I gave you guys an outline, and I'll show you. It looked like this right here from last week. And it shows you exactly what should go on every slide, and that matches up with that research document so that it should be really easy to do, right? To create the slides from what you've researched. And then starting your slideshow, making your Google slide, which this week you can continue, or even if you're just starting. We have this week, I'm going to go back to this document here, November 25th, where I'm giving you this video, and then you guys for the rest of the time should just be working on that Google slideshow, even if you're just starting it today, and making it the best you can. And then next week, I'm going to give you a preview. I probably don't even need to have a video, but I might make one just with a very simple thing. It could only be a minute or two. And next week, December the 2nd, the video is going to talk about, or the instructions are going to talk about, submitting your work, which by the end of time on next Wednesday, right, next week, that's when these should be finished. That's when these should be handed in. So, excuse me. So if you're at the point where you can be working on your slideshow today, then you're in good shape because you have today. You could always finish it on your own time, and next time, next Wednesday, to finish that slideshow and turn it in. I do not want anybody turning them in early. Number one, because I'm going to have a specific way to do that. And number two, because I want you to take your time. I want you to do well. And I myself, I'm getting these from everybody in 5th through 8th grade. So I need a way to keep it organized. And that's going to be next week when we turn them in. All right, so that's everything that's been happening in a nutshell and summed up. I really hope that you're putting in just a little effort to this to do your best, and that I do get these handed in next week, and they do count for grades. Now, the rest of this video, which I'm going to keep as concise as I can, is going to talk about a few little tips about making that Google slideshow. Last week, we went through the basics of how to make a slideshow, the different elements you can add in, and how the program works. For this week, I'm going to talk about a couple of fine-tuning tips or tricks or things to help you out. The first of which, I'm going to start on this slide here, and it has to do with putting text over colorful backgrounds. Now, there's a simple rule, and I teach it to everybody from kindergarten, first grade, all the way up through 8th grade, and that is you want your text to stand out from your background. If you have a dark background, use lighter colored text. If you have a lighter background, use darker colored text. And if you just follow that simple rule, that's good for a lot of things. But where it becomes a problem, where you run into an issue sometimes, and I do myself when I make projects, when I help my own children at home, where we sometimes run into an issue, is what about if your background has many different colors? What if it's multicolored? What if it has lots of light and dark? What if the simple thing that I said earlier about using a contrasting color, it doesn't exactly work? Well, you have a couple of options, and I'm going to hopefully help out. The first option is you could make different letters or different words different colors. If your background happens to be like dark on the left and light on the right, then you could make a light color choice on the left, right, to do the opposite, and a darker color choice on the right. So it is possible to split it up that way. That's one solution. You could do that for each individual letter. If it's something easy like a title where it's not that many letters in the words, you could do that as much as you want, and that can solve the problem. But what makes it a little easier, especially if you have something like a couple bullet points with a few words each and it gets tedious and you don't necessarily want to change every one of those colors, is in the fill to your text box. So right now, this text box has no fill. It is transparent. I think I've showed you guys before, you know, and you've seen, or I've talked about the fact that you can fill in that text box, right? It's this tool up here. This paint bucket right here is your fill color for the text box. This little pencil icon is your border color for the text box. Now, and it works the same way with shapes. Border color you could also change, but I'm not worried about too much for today. I want to point out something to do with the fill color. Now, while you can change those fill colors, and you can make them solid colors, or you can make them gradients, that's going to sometimes work and sometimes not give you what you want. Let's see why. If I did that and I put white as my fill color, well, it kind of worked. It did make it so that this text over here that I had in white didn't show up, but I could change that back. And could that right there be okay? Could that right there work out? Hold on, let me do a little undoing and fix that. But could that work out? Could that fix everything? Could that make everything what I want? It could. That could solve my problem. You could try a gradient with that fill color, and that could solve your problem. That's another possible solution. A couple tips about it. Number one goes with the size of the text box, which could be different than the size of your font or the font spaces that you have. If you see here, look at how there's a border on the left and right. That's a pretty wide, very wide border. There's a tiny border on the bottom, but no border on the top. And you might go, well, wait a minute, I just have one line of text. Why did it do that? Well, you might change your text box size a little bit. If I drag this text box, make it a little wider, or wider from top to bottom, and more narrow on the left and the right, that's going to make it look a little bit better. But in some cases, you say, oh, but that kind of makes my background picture or the picture that's behind it not as good because now it has this big colored box there. So my one other tip as far as that, which is really the main point that I'm getting to because I've used this a lot as a good solution, is to make that fill color transparent. And it's not very obvious how to do that at first. If I go back, I have my text box selected and go back to my fill tool right here. It's not very obvious because there's transparent, which is nothing. There's a solid color, there's a gradient, but I don't see anywhere to change the transparency to something custom, except that there is this word custom right here. And if I click the plus sign, I can then go and I can use these sliders to select any color I want. So let's say for this I want something that's a little bit, I really just want kind of a gray. So I'm going to drag right there and go to a gray. But this last slider that I can use is a transparency slider. This all the way to the left would be clear, like glass, like nothing's there. This all the way to the right would be a solid color. But if I set my transparency somewhere at about a third, between a third and a half, somewhere in here, what it'll do is it will make it so that there's a color in the background, but it's a little more see-through. If you use operating systems like Windows, like Mac, the boxes for the programs and things, they often use this type of transparency, especially around the edges, to make it look a little more stylized, a little nicer. And if you watch the result, here's what that did. Now, I might even go up a little bit more. It's harder to see in this image, but what it did is it shaded it in, but I can see through a little bit, almost like it's colored glass. Let's try that one more time, and I can always go back and adjust by clicking on that fill tool, custom, and the plus sign. And this time, I want to move it just slightly more towards the center, maybe closer to halfway. And that is more what I like. Now, if I click off the box, you can see there is a box there. It's going to help my text to stand out and to be more visible, especially against a colored background because it's shaded in, but it has some transparency to it. So that's a tip. It does take a little guess and check to go back and adjust it to be just right, but it helps you to make that text visible and still see through to the background. All right, so that is one tip. Now, going on to my other tips, I've talked about this a lot. Some of you who have had me for years, I've talked about this almost every year, or every year, in fact. And that is making our slides the best possible layout when you combine sizes of things, right? Now, I did a Goldilocks type situation here with three slides. Here, we have too little. Here, we have too big. And here, we have just right. You want your slides to really look overall like this. Now, it can be a totally different picture, totally different text, totally different fonts, totally different colors, totally different backgrounds. That's all fine. Every slide for every person, for everyone you make, can be different. But look at what I mean by you should have it be about like this, right? See how here in the layout, all of these things are just about right. My text fills up the space with a size and color difference between my title and my informational text. My picture fills up the space well, but has a border around it and doesn't overlap on things. Let's compare that to the two that are not very good. I happened to see somebody who submitted their slideshow last week, even though you weren't really supposed to, no big deal. They submitted their slideshow to me last week that they made, and almost every slide looked like this. If you just glance at this for a second and you think about it, well, what's wrong with this slide? First of all, look at all the dead space. Look at all the empty space, right? There's way too much. A slideshow is meant to be something visual that people look at and see. Compare it back to this one again, that's just about right. This one, there's blank space too. You should not have every single bit of space filled in. That would be too much, but you have to kind of get a feel for it. There's no exact measurement, there's no ruler you could bring out, there's no exact thing I could tell you, but look at how with this one, it's a little bit of space around each thing, but not too much to where most of the frame is still filled up. And the items have a little space in between them. That's called like a margin or called some padding. And there's padding all around, but it's not too much to where there's big blank areas. Back to this one, and look at this. I'm going to have to squint to see this, right? Or strain my eyes. It's too small, especially if these went on and were more bullets or were like as long as a sentence. Look at this giant amount of space between everything, right? This is no good. And this picture, or not to mention these other items, there's no balance to them as far as how they're centered on each other. This picture is up in a corner. Now, maybe if it was brought down here more towards the center, that would improve it a little bit. If this title was brought in a little bit, to fill up this space up here and centered on that space up there, something like that, that's an improvement. That's an improvement by moving those things around. It should be down a little bit more, but even though this is an improvement, what really needs to happen is everything needs to be enlarged. And you guys know how to enlarge things, you know how to change sizes, so I don't need to teach you how to do that, but just with a few simple clicks. If you go back through your slideshow, if you're not rushing, right? If you're not just eager to get it turned in and be done with it and say you're finished, if you go back, I guarantee there are many of you who are doing this project, who are watching, that have similar things going on, where you didn't take a little bit of time and customize the fonts, the colors, the sizes, the layout, the position of where everything is, and you have the same or a similar issue going on. Now look at the difference. Look at how much more pleasing that is, right? Each element, the three objects on the screen, and you could say the background is kind of a fourth object, but the three objects that I changed on the screen, from the picture to the title to the informational text, now they're more balanced, right? It doesn't feel like the slide has way too little or way too much. I'm not going to go through all the fixes because these three have all the same things on them, but see, I made this one match this one a little bit more. It fills up the spaces. It has kind of a normal or regular amount of border or margin or padding around each item, and this is a much better slide. This one here, if this one was too little, this one is way too big and too much. Everything overlaps. This picture, it's way off balance because it's touching the right border or right edge and the bottom edge, but then there's this margin up here at the top. These things are way too large, way off balance, and so I would again change the sizes of those to make everything just a little bit smaller and align it better so that things are centered on each other or have a more consistent amount of space around each one. That's what's going to make this slide much better. One other tiny detail I'll mention because some people miss this or don't know this. Look at how the picture is cutting off the text because it's over top of it. Now, really, I would change the sizes so that that didn't happen. But there is something when you deal with different objects, like here there's text box, picture, called the order of the things. If you imagine that each one is like a piece of paper or a card laid out, and if you did that in real life, some of these would be over top of each other. You can change that order by clicking on an object, right clicking. Let me get this box out of here for a second. Clicking on an object, right clicking, and then if you go to this that says order, you can do four things. You can bring to the front, send to the back, bring forward, or send backward. Bring to the front or send to the back, that puts an object either in the very front of all the others or the very back of all the others. And if you're dealing with multiple objects, like you might have a slide with five, six, seven objects on it, if you have multiple pictures, bring forward or send backward will again do that same thing, but only one layer at a time. So instead of going all the way to the front or all the way to the back, we'll just do that one layer at a time. So I'm not going to take the time and waste time in the video fixing all of this because I think you get the point by now, but I would resize things, move things around, and arrange them a little better so that the slide wound up looking like one of these two, because both of these are well designed, well laid out slides. I'm sorry, there are two final things I'm going to talk about today. The one is that there are a lot of other features in a slideshow. I'm just going to name a few. You can potentially add images, or excuse me, add video or add sounds. I've done that before in slideshows, but I do it very sparingly or very little. I only do it if it's like really, really necessary or would really add something good. When PowerPoint or it's like Google Slideshow was first around and it started being taught and kids started learning it, it was every slide. There was nonstop noise for the animations and sounds for this and that, and it became really just obnoxious and how much people used it, and it really should only be used if it's 100% necessary. It would all happen from this insert tab right here, or this insert in the menu bar right here. You would need files or links to those sounds, to those videos, but I'm not asking anybody to do that. I'm just saying you possibly could. There are a couple of other advanced formatting options that you can use. We talked about these actually in the past when I talked about adding pictures to slides. But if you want to take a look at them for text boxes or really any object that you click on, there is a format menu option right here. You can get to some of the formatting things right from the menu, but then there is a format options button right here, which will bring up a side panel, and it will show you a lot of different things. That you can possibly do and you can kind of play with, fiddle with, or just figure out on your own. I know kids as young as like first and second grade that they're able to say, oh, what's a drop shadow? What does a drop shadow do? What happens if I press that check mark? And what happens if I change some of these things? And they can figure that out. I'm not asking you to do that. You don't have to. But if you're the type of person who likes to really make it a nice slideshow with a lot of finishing touches and customizations, you're welcome to look at that if you have the time. And then last but not least, there are transitions and animations. When you go and think about this as being a final presentation, and I know we've all seen these or used these before, when you make a final presentation, the way that the slides go from one to another, the way that they come onto the screen, there are different types of animations and things that you can use to have that happen. And all of those can be found from the transition menu right here, where you go and you change what type of transition there is when this slide or all the slides or select number of slides come onto the screen. And then object animations, which are the ways that each individual item comes on the screen. Now, number one, you don't have to do any of that. right? You could not do any of it, and that is perfectly fine for this project. Number two, I would ask that if you do, you keep it light, right? To have an animation, say for your title on your title slide, to have an animation there, great, no problem, fine. To have an animation for every single piece of text in every text box on every slide, nobody wants to sit through a slideshow like that. Nobody wants to watch it. It becomes, instead of a positive thing that you added, it becomes kind of a negative where it's too much. It's not enough. It's like I say to my own children, or say, just in general, as an example, if somebody said, hey, here's a bowl of ice cream and you have to eat it right now, that's great. Most people would have no problem and be happy. If somebody said, here is an entire freezer full of ice cream and you have to eat it all right now, oh boy, that ice cream would get very sick after, or sickening after a short amount of time. So it's kind of like that. And I say that analogy in a bunch of different ways, but little bits, not too much. Very last thing, and this applies to everyone in 5th through 8th grade, is your final slide. There is something called works cited. Now, what that means, if those words are unfamiliar for you, is you're basically saying, here are the resources I used, whether they be books, magazines, videos, websites, and many, many different things that are possible. A works cited is saying, here are the things that I used to do my research. Now, I did ask you guys in that research document to copy and paste the addresses from from the websites you used into your research document as the very final box. So all you really need for this is the addresses. I will tell you, if this was a language arts in middle school or a high school English class, making a works cited page gets a little more complicated, a little more tedious. There are a lot of other elements and particulars and things about the way that it's formatted and laid out and everything that you need to do it like 100% job. All that I'm looking for you here to do here is to understand the idea that you did research, you got information from sources, websites, so it's not your own information. So on your last slide, you need to put where that information is from. And as long as we can just have that basic idea, have a works cited page, and have those websites listed, then I think we're in good shape. And that's all I'm asking for. So I have a slide in the title box. I typed works cited. And you could, of course, customize this with colors and fonts and layout and all those things. But very simply, you have a box at the top for the title called Works Cited. Then in the main text box, you go and take those links that are in your research document that you were supposed to have, or if you have to go back to the websites and find them again, you click on the links, do a copy, go into that box, the text box on your works cited page, do a paste, and then enter down to the next line. That's all. And if you just use two websites, there will be one link, enter, second link, done. And that's all. That's all that I'm asking for. That is not technically a complete English language arts class works cited page, but it's the most understanding I just feel that I need you to have for this project in computer class. All right, so that's the end of the video. I hope you do well today. It is really an independent working type of day where you do as much progress as you can. Do not feel like you need to be done. These are not due today. We're not handing them in today. That will be next week. That is what's happening for next week's class. All right? Have a great Thanksgiving weekend, guys, and I will see you next time.